The hum of a warm Georgia morning fills the air, birds chirping, lawn sprinklers hissing, and the low rumble of a distant delivery truck. Sunlight filters through the oak trees lining the quiet cul-de-sac, casting dappled shadows across my driveway. My home, modern yet welcoming, sits at the end of the street, its brick facade standing as a testament to years of hard work. I step onto my porch, coffee in hand, surveying the neighborhood. It's the kind of place that's supposed to embody the American dream: wide streets, manicured lawns, friendly nods between neighbors. At least, that's what the brochures would have you believe. But I've lived here long enough to see the cracks beneath the surface, the way certain people, look at me like I don't belong. They smile, but it never quite reaches their eyes. It started small. A slight hesitation when I greet a neighbor at the mailbox. A second glance at my car, an all-black Range Rover, polished to perfection. Then came the mistaken assumptions. Oh, are you visiting someone? Delivery? The kind of microaggressions that add up over time, sharpening into something uglier. I shake it off. I refuse to let it bother me. Then, the letter arrives. It's tucked into my mailbox alongside the usual bills and ads. Homeowners Association. Urgent notice. My brow furrows as I tear it open. Notice of HOA violation. Excessive vehicles on property. Monthly fee increased by 300%. Immediate compliance required. My jaw tightens. 300%? I scan the street, my mind racing. My driveway holds my Range Rover, my wife's Tesla, and my brother's Camaro when he visits on weekends. That's 3 cars. Half the houses here have just as many, if not more. I exhale sharply. A mistake. It has to be. But deep down I know better. I fold the letter, shoving it into my pocket just as a figure steps onto the sidewalk across the street. Margaret Whitmore, HOA president. Mid-50s, pearls even when she's in a tracksuit, and a permanent expression like she's just smelled something unpleasant. She's watching me. Her gaze flickers to my driveway. Then she smirks. I sip my coffee, my heartbeat steady. She wants me to react. Not today. But something tells me this is just the beginning. The next morning, another letter waits in my mailbox. This one isn't just a fine, it's a warning. Final notice. Failure to comply will result in legal action. I grip the paper tighter. Final notice? The first one came yesterday. My stomach knots. This isn't just an oversight, it's targeted. Across the street, Margaret Whitmore is tending to her flower beds, snipping at roses like she's executing a battle plan. She doesn't look up, but I know she sees me. I exhale, forcing calm. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. I'll handle this the professional way. I pull up the HOA's website, scanning through regulations. No mention of a 3-car limit. I dig deeper, checking past violations. The Reynolds family? 4 cars. The Webbers? 5, including an RV. No fines. My pulse quickens. I send an email requesting clarification. No response. By noon, a tow truck idles at the end of my driveway. I step outside, heart hammering. A stocky man in a neon vest leans against his truck, chewing gum like he's got all day. He glances at me, then at a clipboard. You the homeowner? I cross my arms. I am. He shrugs. Got an order to tow unauthorized vehicles. A slow, creeping heat rises in my chest. Which vehicles? He glances at the Camaro, my brother's, parked neatly in my driveway. That one. I let out a dry laugh. It's not unauthorized. It's private property. His eyes flick behind me. Margaret Whitmore stands at the edge of her lawn, arms crossed. The pieces click into place. I square my shoulders, keeping my voice even. I suggest you check with your employer before you make a mistake. The man hesitates, then steps back. I'll confirm the order. He pulls out his phone, muttering into the receiver. A moment later, he frowns and waves me off. Guess there's a mix-up. He drives away. Margaret doesn't move. I meet her gaze across the street. She tilts her head, lips curling in mock sympathy. HOA rules apply to everyone, Mr. Carter. I step forward. And yet, They seem to be applied selectively. Her smile tightens. We just want to maintain the integrity of our community. There it is. That word. Integrity. The polite way of saying you don't belong. I exhale, steady. I'll be addressing this at the next HOA meeting. Her eyes flicker, just for a second. A crack in her composure. Then she smirks. Oh, I wouldn't worry too much about that. The board has already reviewed your case. She turns on her heel, walking back to her house. My jaw clenches. She thinks this is over. But something tells me she has no idea who she's messing with. The HOA meeting is scheduled for Friday, but by Wednesday, the pressure ramps up. I wake up to find a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. Non-compliant vehicles, final warning. They're playing games now. I scan the street. Margaret Whitmore is watching from her porch, coffee cup in hand, like she's already won. I step inside and dial the HOA office. A robotic voice greets me before dumping me into an automated loop that leads nowhere. After 15 minutes of dead ends, I drive to their office downtown. The receptionist barely glances up. Do you have an appointment? I set the violation notice on the counter. I need to speak with someone. This is harassment. She sighs, flipping through a calendar. The board is unavailable. A door opens down the hall. A man steps out, Paul Henderson, the HOA vice president. Silver hair, khakis, the type who shakes your hand with a firm grip just to prove something. He spots me, and his expression barely hides his annoyance. Mr. Carter, what can we do for you? I keep my voice measured. I'm here to discuss these fines. My vehicles aren't in violation, yet I'm being targeted. Paul sighs, like he's speaking to a child. The HOA has rules. If you feel they've been unfairly applied, you're welcome to submit a formal complaint. I fold my arms. I already did. No response. Margaret's voice floats down the hall before I see her. She's been listening. She steps forward, placing a manicured hand on Paul's arm. We just want to maintain standards. I'm sure you understand. There it is again. Standards. I hold her gaze. Your standards don't seem to apply to everyone. Paul clears his throat. Look, this isn't personal. I lean in. Funny, because it sure as hell feels like it. His smile tightens. We'll discuss your concerns at the meeting.
Dismissed.
I walk out, fists clenched. They're stonewalling me.
Fine.
Two can play that game. Gathering evidence. That evening, I call my neighbor, Deshawn, a real estate attorney. This stinks, he says after I explain. HOAs love to bully people who don't fit their little mold. You need proof. So I start digging. I pull public records. Turns out Margaret has been HOA president for 6 years, unchallenged. I find old complaints from previous homeowners, mostly ignored. I talk to neighbors. Several admit they've parked extra cars for years without fines. Then I hit gold. An older couple, the Martins, tell me their son, who moved last year, faced the same harassment.
Why?
Because he was black. They never said it outright, but the pattern was clear. By Thursday night, I have enough evidence to make this very public. The final straw. Friday morning, I step outside to find a tow truck already hooking up my brother's Camaro. My blood runs cold. They didn't even wait for the meeting. I march outside. Put that car down. The driver barely looks at me. HOA order. I whirl around. Margaret stands near the curb, arms folded, smirking. You have no right, I say, voice low, controlled. She shrugs. The board voted. We're enforcing the rules. I take a deep breath. Then I pull out my phone and start recording. This is illegal, I say, voice carrying down the street. Neighbors step onto their porches, watching. I have proof of selective enforcement. Discriminatory fines. A clear abuse of power. Margaret's smile flickers. I turn to the driver. If you tow this car, you're complicit in illegal activity, and I will sue. A tense beat. The driver scowls, unhooks the car, and climbs back into his truck. Margaret's eyes darken. She knows she's losing control. I pocket my phone. See you at the meeting. She doesn't respond, but I see it in her face. She's rattled. And she should be. The HOA meeting is held in the community clubhouse, a beige, overpriced building meant to impress homebuyers. Tonight, it's packed. Word spread after the tow truck incident. Neighbors who never cared about HOA politics now fill the seats, murmuring. Some glance at me with curiosity. Others, like Deshawn and the Martins, nod in quiet support. At the front, a long table is set up for the board members. Margaret Whitmore sits dead center, smiling like a queen on her throne. Paul Henderson sits beside her, flipping through a folder, looking uninterested. Margaret taps the microphone. Let's begin. She breezes through minor agenda points, dragging it out. She wants me to stew. But I sit back, relaxed. Finally, she clears her throat. Now, on to our next issue. A repeated violation concerning excessive vehicles. A low murmur spreads through the room. Everyone knows who she's talking about. Margaret leans forward, lacing her fingers together. Mr. Carter, as you've been repeatedly informed, our neighborhood has regulations. While we welcome diversity, I almost laugh. We must also maintain order. She turns to Paul, who slides a folder across the table. Per our investigation, you have failed to comply, and as such, the board has voted to triple your HOA fees until further action is taken. A gasp ripples through the room. Margaret tilts her head, eyes gleaming. She thinks she's won. I take a breath, letting the moment stretch. Then slowly I stand. Thank you, Margaret. I say smoothly. I appreciate your concern for order. But before we move forward, I have a few things to share. She waves a hand, feigning boredom. Mr. Carter, we've reviewed your complaints. You're welcome to submit. I pull out a stack of printed documents. Actually, I did some reviewing of my own. The room quiets. I hold up the first paper. Public records show that multiple households in this neighborhood have 4, even 5 cars in their driveway. Yet, I'm the only one fined. A few heads nod. I hold up the second. Here's a report from the Martins. Their son was harassed by this HOA for similar reasons. A pattern. Margaret's smile falters. I take a step forward, my voice calm but firm. But here's the best part. I requested financial records. You've issued 22 violations in the past 2 years. 18 of them were against Black homeowners. A stunned silence. Then, whispers. Margaret's face tightens. That's an outrageous accusation. I raise a hand. I'm not finished. I hold up my phone. This is last night's tow truck incident. Recorded. Proof that you targeted me despite my cars being legally parked. I press play. Margaret's voice rings out, clear as day. The board voted. We're enforcing the rules. If you tow this car, you're complicit in illegal activity, and I will sue. The murmurs turn into full-blown discussions. Paul looks pale. Margaret's hands clench in her lap. I cross my arms. Now, I'd like to ask the room, how many of you have been harassed by this HOA? Slowly, hands start rising. Margaret's mask cracks. This is ridiculous, she hisses. You're just trying to stir up trouble. I pull out one last document, the deed to my home. Margaret scoffs. Yes, we're aware you own your property, Mr. Carter. I smirk. Oh, I own more than that. I slide another paper across the table. Margaret reads it, then freezes. Her face drains of color. Paul snatches it from her hands. His eyes widen. I lean in. See, I don't just own my house. I own 6 properties in this neighborhood. Some under my name, some under my LLC. That makes me the majority property owner. The room erupts. Margaret's mouth opens and closes, but no sound comes out. I straighten, which means, as of this moment, I'm officially challenging your position as HOA president. Margaret staggers back. For the first time, she looks afraid. The room is chaos. Neighbors whisper in shock, some outright gasping. Paul Henderson, the HOA vice president, flips through the document again, blinking like he's just seen a ghost. Margaret Whitmore, usually composed and smug, is stone still, her face paling by the second. I fold my arms, letting the weight of my revelation settle over her. She knows exactly what this means. In most HOAs, the board wields power over homeowners, but when a single individual owns multiple properties, their voting power multiplies. And with 6 houses under my name, I hold enough influence to call for a leadership vote. Margaret finds her voice. This is absurd. She forces a smile, though it trembles at the edges. One homeowner can't just come in and, "Oh, but I can," I interrupt smoothly, turning to Paul. Per HOA bylaws, if a homeowner possesses a significant stake in the neighborhood, they have the right to contest board leadership. Paul swallows hard, flipping through the rulebook in front of him. The silence drags. Then, finally, he's right. Margaret jerks toward him. What? Paul clears his throat. A motion to challenge the presidency requires a minimum of 30% homeowner backing. With Mr. Carter's properties combined, his votes count toward. He pauses. Then sighs. 42%. The room erupts again. Margaret's breath hitches. She's losing control. I turn to the crowd. I move for an immediate vote to remove Margaret Whitmore as HOA president. Margaret lunges for the microphone. This is a sham. This man is manipulating the system. Deshawn, my lawyer neighbor, steps forward. You mean the same system that allowed you to fine him unfairly? That let you enforce rules selectively. Margaret's nostrils flare. The board will never agree. I second the motion. The voice is unexpected.
Paul.
Margaret whirls on him. Paul, you spineless little. I've been on this board long enough to know a sinking ship when I see one, he mutters, rubbing his temples. We have actual complaints now. Financial records, video proof. If we ignore this, we open ourselves up to lawsuits. Margaret's hands clench into fists. I press forward. All in favor of removing Margaret Whitmore from her position? A few hesitant hands go up at first. Then more. Half the room. Then the majority. Margaret looks around, panicked. You can't do this. I smile. Looks like we just did. The final blow. Margaret staggers back, breathless. She turns toward Paul, but he won't meet her gaze. She turns to the other board members, but they shrink away. I press the knife in deeper. You see, Margaret, I didn't just come here tonight with evidence. I hold up my phone. I came with reinforcements. The clubhouse doors swing open. 2 men in suits step inside. One flashes a badge. Paul Richter, Department of Housing and Urban Development. Margaret freezes. The HUD agent steps forward, flipping open a file. We received a tip about possible housing discrimination within this HOA. Fines disproportionately targeting minority homeowners, intimidation tactics, misuse of funds. The kind of things that lead to federal investigations. Margaret's mouth opens, but no sound comes out. The second agent hands a folder to Paul Henderson. And thanks to these detailed records, we have enough to warrant an audit. Paul reads over the documents, his face turning gray. Oh, hell. Margaret stumbles back. This isn't happening, she whispers. But it is. I glance toward the back of the room, where local news reporters have just walked in. Cameras lift. Lights flash. Margaret spins toward me, eyes burning. You set me up. I tilt my head. You set yourself up. The collapse. Margaret breaks. This is ridiculous, she screeches, slamming her hands on the table. This neighborhood was fine until people like him started moving in. The room goes silent. A cold, suffocating silence. She knows she said too much. Too honestly. Paul slowly leans away from her, as if she's contagious. Neighbors whisper. Some look disgusted. Others, ashamed. Even the ones who silently agreed with her now realize how ugly it sounds out loud. The HUD agent steps forward. Ms. Whitmore, we'll need you to come with us for questioning. Margaret shakes her head violently.
No.
No, I won't. She turns to Paul. Say something. Do something. Paul closes the rulebook in front of him. You're on your own, Margaret. Margaret collapses into her chair, stunned. Public exposure. The news reporters swarm in, microphones in hand. Neighbors take out their phones recording. Margaret hides her face, but it's too late. Tomorrow morning, her name will be all over the local news. By next week, She'll be resigning in disgrace. And as for the HOA, I step forward. With Margaret gone, I'd like to propose a new agenda. Paul sighs. Let me guess. Reforming the HOA. I smirk. Oh no. Dissolving it. The room erupts into cheers. Margaret lets out a strangled cry, but no one is listening anymore. Her reign is over.
And justice?
Justice has been served. The next morning, Margaret Whitmore's face is everywhere. Local news stations loop the footage of her meltdown at the HOA meeting. Articles dissect her discriminatory policies and the HOA's selective enforcement tactics. Social media explodes with the clips, her sneering voice, the moment she let her mask slip, her panic denial as HUD agents arrived. But the real blow comes 2 days later. A formal federal investigation into the HOA's practices is announced. Not just for discrimination, but financial fraud. Turns out, Margaret and Paul weren't just targeting homeowners like me, they were also pocketing money from illegal fines.
And now?
They have to answer for it. Margaret falls hard. By the end of the week, Margaret resigns in disgrace. Her once pristine reputation is in tatters. Homeowners she used to control with an iron fist now avoid her like a disease. Businesses she once socialized with won't take her calls. The country club revokes her membership. She becomes a pariah in the very community she ruled. And the cherry on top? Her own property values plummet. She spent years enforcing strict regulations to preserve the neighborhood. But after the scandal, buyers don't want to touch a house tied to a corrupt HOA. Her biggest nightmare, losing status, losing control, has come true. The end of the HOA. With Margaret gone and Paul barely holding it together, I call for a final vote. Dissolve the HOA. The room, once divided, now rallies behind me. Neighbors who sat on the fence before, ashamed of their silence, now vote to end the very system they upheld. The motion passes. No more random fines. No more selective enforcement. No more power plays. The HOA is dead. A community transformed. A month later, the neighborhood feels different. People who never spoke before now wave as they pass. Deshawn's kids ride their bikes freely, without worry. The Martins, once considering moving, decide to stay. Without the HOA's iron grip, the community learns to manage itself. People realize that the order Margaret enforced was really just discrimination dressed up as decorum. And me? I park my cars in my driveway. Every single one of them. No fines. No notices. No threats. Just peace. A final moment. One evening, I'm sitting on my porch when I notice someone at the edge of my driveway. Margaret. She looks nothing like the woman who once sneered down at me. Her clothes are wrinkled. Her hair, unkempt. She doesn't speak at first. Just stands there, eyes dark with something I can't quite name. Regret? Shame? Fear? Then, barely above a whisper. You ruined me. I lean forward, resting my elbows on my knees. No, Margaret. You did that yourself. For the first time, she has no comeback. She turns, shoulders slumped, and walks away. As I watch her go, I realize something. For years, she wielded fear like a weapon.
Now?
She's the one afraid.